Ambassador Kelrix of the Vathian Collective had never considered the humans to be anything more than an amusing curiosity. The galaxy's youngest spacefaring species, they had stumbled into faster-than-light travel merely 3 generations ago, emerging from their isolated star system with wide eyes and eager smiles. They spoke of peace, of cooperation, of mutual understanding between species. They brought gifts of art and music, shared their scientific discoveries freely, and established trade routes that benefited everyone involved. In the 200 cycles since first contact, humanity had become the Galactic Council's favorite example of a successful integration. They were the peaceful ones, the diplomatic ones, the species that preferred negotiation to confrontation. Kelrix himself had written several papers on human psychology, their peculiar aversion to large-scale conflict, and their remarkable ability to find common ground with even the most alien of minds. He had called them the galaxy's gentle giants in his most recent publication, a reference to their above-average physical stature combined with their consistently peaceful demeanor. Standing now in the Grand Council chamber on the station orbiting Zenthra Prime, Kelrix wished desperately that he had been wrong about everything. The circular chamber, vast enough to hold representatives from all 473 member species, had fallen into a silence so profound that the ambassador could hear the subtle hum of the station's gravitational generators 3 levels below. Every eye, compound and simple, was fixed on the human delegation's empty seats. The ornate chairs of Earth's representatives stood vacant, a deliberate absence that spoke louder than any speech. It had been 17 standard hours since the deadline had passed, 17 hours since the Council had voted to reject humanity's petition, and 12 hours since every human ship, station, and outpost in Council space had gone dark. The decision had seemed so reasonable at the time. The Krellian Empire, one of the Council's most powerful founding members, had claimed a mineral-rich system in the disputed border territories between their space and the human colony sectors. The system, designated HD 189733 by human astronomers and Krellin AK by the Empire, contained 7 planets, including 2 that were already home to fledgling human colonies totaling some 4 million settlers. The Krellians presented ancient star charts, documents supposedly proving that their ancestors had surveyed the system millennia before humanity had even achieved spaceflight. The evidence was questionable at best, potentially fabricated at worst, but the Krellians were an old and influential species with extensive military capabilities and trading networks that touched every corner of Council space. Humanity, by contrast, was new, small, and had always been so accommodating, so willing to compromise. The vote had been 347 to 94, with 32 abstentions. Kelrix had voted with the majority, convincing himself that the humans would understand, that they would accept a generous compensation package and relocate their colonists peacefully as they had done before. 5 times in the past century, humanity had yielded territory to more established species, always with grace, always with that patient smile that made them seem so civilized, so unlike the primitive warlike races that occasionally clawed their way into space only to destroy themselves in pointless conflicts. Chancellor Vornis, a towering Kelgaran whose crystalline body refracted the chamber's lights into dancing rainbows, finally broke the silence. His voice resonated through the chamber with the deep, harmonic tones of his species. The human silence is a negotiating tactic. They seek to make us uncomfortable, to reconsider our lawful decision. They will return to the table. They always do. But Counselor Thessa of the Margalian Unity, a species known for their extensive intelligence networks and information brokering, rose from her delegation's platform. Her 4 arms moved in a gesture that her people used to signal grave concern. With respect, Chancellor, our monitoring stations report something unprecedented. Every human vessel within our sensor range has changed course. Their colony ships, their trading vessels, their scientific expeditions, all of them are returning to human-controlled space. More concerning, we have lost contact with our embedded observers in human civilian networks. Not because the humans have discovered them, but because those networks have restructured in ways we can no longer penetrate. Kelrix felt his respiratory sacs constrict. The humans had allowed council observers into their communication networks as a gesture of goodwill and transparency, something no other species had ever voluntarily permitted. That access had been a cornerstone of the council's understanding of human society, culture, and intentions. If that window had closed, then the council was suddenly blind to the activities of an entire spacefaring civilization. Perhaps they are simply upgrading their systems, offered Ambassador Realm of the Poskarian Merchant League, though his bioluminescent patterns flickered with uncertainty. The humans are always tinkering with their technology. It is one of their more endearing qualities. Thessa's main eyes narrowed while her secondary eyes continued to scan the assembled council members. Our analysts do not believe this is routine maintenance. 3 hours ago, every human military vessel on joint patrol duties abandoned their posts simultaneously. They did not file departure notices, did not respond to hails, did not follow any of the protocols that humanity itself had helped establish. They simply jumped to FTL and vanished. Furthermore, the human ambassador sent a single message before their delegation departed the station. She gestured, and a holographic display materialized in the center of the chamber, showing a brief text communication in both human English and galactic standard. The message was terrifyingly simple: "You have made your choice. We will make ours." Kelrix tried to convince himself that this was posturing, that humanity would not dare to challenge a council that represented the combined might of hundreds of species. The humans numbered only 34 billion across all their colonies and habitats, a fraction of the council's total population of over 40 trillion. Their fleet was respectable for such a young species but consisted of perhaps 2,000 military vessels of various classes, compared to the council's combined naval strength of over 500,000 warships. Mathematics alone made any thought of human military resistance absurd. And yet, something cold was settling into Kelrix's core, a primal fear that his rational mind could not quite dismiss. He thought of the human literature he had studied, the stories they told themselves about their own history. So many of them were about war, about conflict, about violence on a scale that made his skin crawl. When he had asked human scholars about this during a cultural exchange, they had laughed gently and explained that these were ancient stories, tales from their primitive past before they had achieved enlightenment and left such barbarism behind. They pointed to the 2 centuries of relative peace on Earth following their near destruction in something they called the Third World War, a conflict so devastating that it had nearly rendered their homeworld uninhabitable. Surely, the humans had said, no species that had touched the abyss of self-annihilation would ever willingly return to it. Kelrix had believed them. He had wanted to believe them. But now, as the council chamber erupted into debates and accusations and nervous speculation, he found himself remembering details from those human stories that he had previously dismissed as primitive exaggeration. The human capacity for organization under pressure. Their disturbing creativity when it came to solving problems through the application of force. The pride they seemed to take in what they called determination or resilience, qualities that in most species were simply called stubbornness or an inability to recognize when one had been defeated. The emergency session continued for another 3 hours, with various representatives proposing different responses ranging from economic sanctions to sending a diplomatic envoy to opening communication channels with human colony governors who might be more reasonable than their central government. The Krellian delegation, whose territorial claim had sparked this crisis, remained conspicuously quiet, their reptilian features unreadable. Kelrix noticed that the Krellian military attaché was receiving a steady stream of discreet communications on his personal device, each message causing his throat sacs to swell slightly larger. It was the Krellian ambassador, Lord Skrull, who finally stood and spoke, his voice cutting through the chamber's chaos like a blade. This debate is unnecessary. The Krellian Imperial fleet has already dispatched a battle group to take possession of the disputed system. We expect to have secured all 7 planets within the next 48 hours. The human colonists will be given the opportunity to evacuate peacefully or accept Krellian governance. Once we have established facts on the ground, or rather in space, the humans will have no choice but to accept the Council's decision. The chamber erupted again, this time with alarm rather than mere concern. Even among the species that had voted in the Krellians' favor, there was obvious discomfort with such unilateral military action. Chancellor Vornis's crystalline form flashed with agitated colors as he tried to restore order, but it was a communication alert that finally silenced the assembly. A priority signal from the Council's long-range monitoring network, the kind of alert that was only transmitted in cases of extreme emergency. The aide who received the message was a young Feltorian, her first standing on end as she read the incoming data. She looked up at Chancellor Vornis with all three of her eyes wide with fear. "Chancellor, the monitoring station at the periphery of the HD 189733 system reports that the Krellian battle group has emerged from FTL and is moving to engage the human colonies." She paused, her voice dropping to almost a whisper. "The humans are not evacuating. They are powering up weapons systems on their orbital stations and forming their ships into combat formations." Kelrix felt his heart sink. This was madness. The human presence in the system consisted of 2 medium-sized colonies, perhaps a dozen orbital habitats, and maybe 30 to 40 civilian vessels. The Krellian battle group would consist of at least 100 warships, including several heavy cruisers and possibly even a dreadnought. It would not be a battle. It would be a massacre. And once human blood was spilled, once those 4 million colonists were killed or displaced by force, there would be no going back to the comfortable illusion of humanity the peaceful, humanity the reasonable. "Can we contact the human forces?" Vornis demanded. "Can we mediate before this escalates?" Thessa shook her head, her expression grim. "We have been trying. They are not responding to any hails on any frequency. However, we are receiving telemetry from our monitoring station. I can put it on the main display if the Council wishes to observe." No one wanted to observe, but everyone understood that they needed to. The holographic display shifted, showing a real-time tactical map of the HD 189733 system. The Krellian battle group appeared as a cluster of red icons, 123 vessels strong, arranged in a standard Imperial formation designed to overwhelm any opposition through sheer firepower. The human forces showed as blue icons, and Kelrix counted only 42 ships, most of them small escorts and patrol craft, with just 3 vessels large enough to be considered true warships. What struck him immediately was the human formation. It was not defensive. The human ships were not huddling around their colonies or preparing to screen an evacuation. Instead, they had arranged themselves in a wide, dispersed pattern that made no tactical sense according to any military doctrine Kelrix had studied. The ships were too far apart to support each other, too scattered to concentrate their firepower. It looked like they had simply scattered randomly through the system's inner planets. Lord Skrull observed the display with evident satisfaction. "As you can see, the humans are in disarray. They lack the military experience to even form a proper defensive line. This will be over quickly." But the Krellian military attaché was staring at the display with what Kelrix had learned to recognize as confusion in that species. "That is not disarray," he said quietly. "Those positions are deliberate. They are using the system's gravity wells to create overlapping fields of fire while maximizing the distance our weapons will have to travel. It is actually quite sophisticated." Lord Skrull turned to his military officer with visible irritation. "Sophisticated or not, it is irrelevant. Numbers will prevail. Order our forces to engage and eliminate any resistance." The tactical display updated in real time, showing the Krellian vessels accelerating toward the inner system, their weapons warming up, their shields at maximum. The human ships held their positions, making minor adjustments but not retreating, not fleeing, not even trying to avoid the inevitable confrontation. Kelrix watched, unable to look away, unable to shake the feeling that he was witnessing something terrible being born. The first human ship to fire was a small escort vessel, something their navy designated a frigate, barely a third the mass of the Krellian heavy cruiser it engaged. According to the sensor telemetry, the human ship fired a single projectile, something moving at a significant fraction of light speed but clearly not an energy weapon. The Krellian cruiser's shield should have deflected it easily, and for a moment, they did, the protective energy barrier flaring bright as it absorbed the kinetic impact. Then the projectile detonated, and the sensor readings went momentarily insane. The explosion was not chemical, not conventional nuclear, but something else, something that caused the monitoring station's instruments to scream warnings about exotic radiation and spatial distortions. When the sensors recalibrated, the Krellian heavy cruiser was simply gone, not disabled, not damaged, but completely obliterated. In its place was an expanding cloud of debris and superhot plasma. The council chamber had gone silent again. Kelrick stared at the display, his mind refusing to process what he had just witnessed. A single shot. One small human ship had destroyed a heavy cruiser with a single shot. What was that weapon? Vornis demanded, his voice tight with shock. Thessa's fingers danced across her console, analyzing the sensor data. Our monitoring station classifies it as some form of antimatter warhead with a gravitational compression trigger. The yield was approximately 400 megatons, focused through what appears to be a magnetic lens to maximize armor penetration before detonation. She looked up, her expression stunned. That single missile carried more destructive power than most species use in entire planetary bombardments. The tactical display updated again, and this time, every human ship fired simultaneously. 42 vessels launched what the sensors counted as over 300 missiles, each one accelerating to terrifying velocities, each one apparently carrying a miniature star's worth of destructive energy. The Krellian battlegroup's point defense systems activated, filling space with interceptor fire and energy beams, and to their credit, they managed to destroy nearly two-thirds of the incoming missiles. The remaining 100 or so found their targets. The holographic display became an expanding field of explosions, each one wiping away a red icon, each detonation representing hundreds of Krellian lives snuffed out in an instant. When the chaos cleared, the Krellian battle group had lost 47 vessels, including 2 of its heavy cruisers and 1 of its dreadnoughts. The remaining Krellian ships immediately broke formation, scattering in all directions as their commanders apparently realized that standard tactics were worse than useless against this kind of firepower. But the humans were not done. Their ships began moving now, accelerating at rates that should have turned their crews into paste against the bulkheads. The human vessels pulled maneuvers that violated every understanding Kelrick's had about the limitations of inertial dampening technology, turning and burning with the agility of fighters despite their mass. And as they moved, they fired again, and again, each salvo timed perfectly to catch the Krellian ships as they tried to retreat, to regroup, to understand what was happening to them. The Krellian military attaché was speaking rapidly into his communications device, his voice harsh with urgency. "Retreat, you fools, retreat now. Full FTL, maximum range, abandon the objective." But FTL jumps required time to calculate, required the ship to be on a stable trajectory, required safety protocols to prevent a vessel from jumping into a star or a planet or another ship. The human weapons gave the Krellian fleet no time. In 17 minutes, the battle was over. Of the 123 Krellian vessels that had entered the HD 189733 system with the intent of claiming it by force, only 38 escaped into FTL, most of them damaged, all of them fleeing in different directions. 85 ships had been destroyed. Kelrick did a quick calculation in his head and felt sick. Somewhere between 40 and 60,000 Krellians had died in less time than it took to conduct a council vote. And the human ships had not suffered a single loss. Not one. They had not even been hit as far as the sensors could determine. They had fought with a precision and lethality that belonged in nightmares, not in the civilized space that the Council had spent millennia cultivating. Lord Skrull stood frozen, staring at the tactical display as if he could will the red icons to reappear. His throat sacs had turned a pale, sickly color. Around the chamber, representatives from hundreds of species sat in stunned silence, processing what they had just witnessed. It was Thessa who finally spoke, her voice carefully controlled. I believe we may have made a critical error in our assessment of humanity. We saw their peace as a sign of weakness, their diplomacy as evidence of limited military capability. We failed to ask the most important question. What question? Kelrix heard himself ask, though part of him did not want to know the answer. Thessa's 4 eyes fixed on him with an expression that might have been pity. We never asked why a species with this level of military technology and tactical sophistication would choose peace in the first place. We never questioned what it meant that they preferred negotiation to conflict. We assumed it was because they could not fight. She gestured at the dissipating clouds of debris that had been a Krellian fleet. Clearly, that was not the reason. The holographic display changed, showing a new message transmitted on all frequencies from the human colony in the HD 189733 system. This time, it was a video communication. A human appeared, dressed in a dark military uniform that humanity had claimed was purely ceremonial, a relic of their violent past that they maintained only for historical purposes. The human was female, her hair gray, her face lined with age and something harder, something that Kelrix now recognized as experience in matters that most council species had forgotten. She spoke clearly, her voice calm but carrying an edge that made Kelrix's skin prickle. I am Admiral Chen of the United Earth Systems Defense Force. The Krellian Empire has committed an act of war against human sovereign territory. Their fleet has been repelled. This system remains under human control. To the Galactic Council, we offer this single warning. We came to the stars seeking peace. We have pursued peace for 200 years. We have compromised, negotiated, and yielded because we believed that the Council valued justice and cooperation. We were wrong. You have shown us that the Council respects only strength. Very well. You will have our strength. She paused, and Kelrix saw something in her eyes that chilled him to his core. It was not anger, not hatred, but something colder, more calculating. Determination. Humanity is recalling all of its citizens from Council space. We are severing all diplomatic ties. We are withdrawing from all treaties and agreements. And we are drawing a line around our territory that will be defended with the full might of the human defense force. Any species that crosses that line without permission will be treated as hostile. We have shown you we can defend ourselves. Do not make us show you what we can do when we attack. The transmission ended. The chamber remained silent. And Kelrix realized with horrifying clarity that the galaxy's gentle giants had just declared themselves the galaxy's newest apex predators, and that this war, this terrible war that should never have begun, was only just starting. The war that the Galactic Council had accidentally ignited did not unfold as anyone expected. In the 3 standard weeks following Admiral Chen's declaration, 17 separate species attempted to probe the newly established human defensive perimeter, each convinced that the destruction of the Krellian fleet had been luck, or deception, or some form of technological trick that could not possibly be repeated. Kelrix tracked each incursion from his office on Zenthra Prime, watching the tactical reports with growing horror as every single test of human resolve ended the same way: complete and overwhelming defeat for any force that crossed into human-claimed space without authorization. The Margalian Unity, confident in their stealth technology, sent a squadron of intelligence-gathering vessels disguised as merchant ships into human territory. The humans detected them within minutes of their border crossing and transmitted exact specifications of each vessel, including details about their hidden sensor arrays and crew complements, then politely but firmly escorted them back to neutral space. The message was clear: human detection capabilities were far beyond what they had ever revealed to the Council. The Vakarian Dominion, a militaristic species that had never fully trusted the Council's authority, dispatched a raiding force to strike at what they believed was a lightly defended human mining operation in a border system. The raiders never returned. The only record of their fate was a brief transmission from a human patrol ship informing the Vakarian government where they could retrieve their surviving crew members from emergency escape pods. The mining operation remained untouched. The Vakarian warships had been systematically disabled and then destroyed without a single human casualty. But it was the Krellian Empire's response that truly demonstrated how catastrophically the galaxy had misunderstood humanity. Lord Skrull, humiliated by the loss of the HD 189733 fleet and facing severe political pressure from the imperial court, convinced the Krellian emperor to authorize a full military assault. The empire assembled the largest battle fleet it had deployed in over 4 centuries, 1,200 warships including 6 of their massive dreadnoughts, vessels so large they had their own internal ecosystems. The fleet represented nearly 40% of the Krellian Empire's total military strength, and it was supported by auxiliary forces from 3 allied species who saw an opportunity to share in the spoils of what they assumed would be an easy victory against an upstart human civilization. Kelrix learned of the Krellian fleet's deployment through Thessa, who had become an unofficial partner in trying to understand the unfolding crisis. They met in a secure conference room, away from the increasingly chaotic council sessions where species were beginning to fracture into pro-human and anti-human factions. Thessa's expression was grave as she shared her intelligence network's latest findings. The Krellian fleet is moving toward the Arcturus sector, where humanity has 7 colony worlds and approximately 15 billion inhabitants, she explained, her 4 hands manipulating the holographic display to show fleet movements. The Krellians have declared their intention to claim these worlds as war reparations for the loss of their initial fleet. They are being supported by Poskarian merchant vessels, Heltharian mobile supply bases, and a battle group from the Tornassian Confederacy. Kelrix studied the numbers and felt his respiratory sacs constrict. That is over 1,500 ships total. Even with their advanced weapons, surely the humans cannot withstand such force? Thessa's secondary eyes focused on him with an intensity that made him uncomfortable. Kelrix, my intelligence network has been working constantly to understand how humanity achieved such rapid technological advancement. We have finally begun to piece together the truth, and it is far more disturbing than advanced missiles. She pulled up a different display, this one showing human historical records. Do you know what humanity was doing during the 200 years before they achieved faster-than-light travel? They were recovering from their global conflict, Kelrix said, reciting what every council member knew. The Third World War nearly destroyed their civilization. They spent 2 centuries rebuilding, achieving global unity, and developing peaceful cooperation. That is what they told us, Thessa corrected. It is not a lie, but it is not the complete truth. Yes, they rebuilt their civilization. But they also spent 200 years absolutely terrified that they would destroy themselves again. So they developed something that no other species in council records has ever created, comprehensive war prevention systems. Artificial intelligence networks designed specifically to monitor for and prevent large-scale human conflict. Kelrix felt confused. I do not understand. How does preventing war make them better at fighting wars? Thessa's expression became something like admiration mixed with fear. Because the artificial intelligence systems they created had to understand war completely in order to prevent it. For 2 centuries, these AI networks studied every conflict in human history, analyzed every tactical and strategic principle, simulated millions of possible wars, and developed countermeasures for each one. When humanity finally achieved FTL and encountered us, these AI networks turned their attention outward. They studied every species in the Council, analyzed our military capabilities, our tactical doctrines, our psychological profiles. And they have spent the last 200 years running simulations, preparing for a war that they hoped would never come. The implications crashed over Kelrix like a physical wave. The humans have been preparing for this since first contact. All of their peace, their cooperation, it was while they were simultaneously planning for war. Not planning for war, Thessa corrected gently. Planning for every possible war. There is a difference. They genuinely wanted peace, genuinely pursued diplomatic solutions. But they also understood that hope is not a strategy. So they prepared. Every treaty they signed, they ensured they could defend themselves if it was broken. Every technology they traded, they had countermeasures already developed. Every species they befriended, they also knew exactly how to fight if friendship failed. She gestured at the display showing the approaching Krellian fleet. The weapons they used at HD 189733 were not recently developed. They have had antimatter missiles for over a century. They simply never mentioned them because there was never a need. Kelrix thought about all his research, all his papers about human psychology and their peaceful nature. He had been studying a facade, or rather, he had been studying only half of the truth. Humanity's peaceful demeanor was genuine, but it was the peace of a species that knew exactly how terrible war could be and had decided that avoiding it was worth almost any compromise. Until the compromises demanded more than they were willing to pay. "We need to warn the Krellians," Kelrix said urgently. "If they proceed with this attack, the casualties will be unprecedented." Thessa shook her head slowly. "We have tried. The Krellian Emperor believes that the HD 189733 incident was only possible because his forces were surprised and unprepared. He has convinced himself that a properly prepared fleet and full military formation cannot be defeated by the humans. He has also secured promises from 12 other council species that they will join the war effort if the Krellian fleet succeeds in taking the Arcturus sector. This has become about more than territory now. This has become about whether the old order of the galaxy will submit to human demands or reassert dominance." The Krellian fleet entered the Arcturus sector 4 days later. The Council's monitoring stations tracked their approach and broadcast the telemetry to anyone who wished to observe, which turned out to be most of the known galaxy. Kelrix watched from the Council chamber, where an emergency session had been called, though no one was conducting official business. Every representative was fixated on the holographic display showing the approaching confrontation. The human defensive fleet in the Arcturus sector numbered only 200 vessels, including orbital defense platforms around the 7 colony worlds. It should have been no contest. The Krellian fleet alone outnumbered them 6-1, and their allied forces added even more overwhelming superiority. But Kelrix noticed immediately that the human formation was nothing like the scattered deployment at HD 189733. This time, the human ships were arranged in multiple layered spheres around their colony worlds, with precise spacing that suggested very careful calculation. The Krellian fleet commander, Admiral Kress, transmitted a demand for surrender, offering the human defenders the opportunity to evacuate the civilian population before the Empire claimed the worlds. The human response came from someone the Council had never encountered before, Fleet Admiral Marcus Werner, Supreme Commander of Human Defense Forces. Werner appeared on the display as a human male of indeterminate age, his uniform bearing insignias that suggested extensive military experience. When he spoke, his voice carried none of Admiral Chen's restrained anger. Instead, he sounded almost regretful. "Admiral Kress, the United Earth Systems has no desire to take Krellian lives. You have been misled by your government about your chances of success in this engagement. I am authorized to offer you and your fleet safe passage back to Krellian space if you withdraw immediately. This offer expires in 1 standard hour." Kelrix could see Lord Skrull's throat sac swell with indignation at what he clearly perceived as human arrogance. In the tactical display, the Krellian fleet continued its approach, weapon systems charging, shields at maximum strength. They had learned from the HD 189733 disaster and were maintaining maximum defensive readiness. The hour expired. The Krellian fleet continued forward. And Fleet Admiral Werner gave an order that made Kelrix's blood run cold: execute Prometheus Protocol. Full authorization. May whatever gods exist forgive us. What happened next would be studied by military historians for generations, assuming any civilizations survived to produce such historians. The human ships did not fire missiles this time. Instead, each vessel activated what the monitoring station's sensors initially classified as some form of directed energy weapon, but the readings made no sense. The beams that lanced out from human ships were not lasers, not particle beams, not plasma projectors. They were something that caused space itself to distort, creating what the terrified monitoring station operators described as tears in reality. The beams touched the Krellian shields and simply ignored them, passing through the energy barriers as if they were not there. When they struck the Krellian vessels themselves, the ships did not explode. They collapsed, their matter compressing down to points of infinite density before winking out of existence entirely. The Krellian dreadnought Pride of Krellin AK, a vessel 3 kilometers long with a crew of 40,000, ceased to exist in 1.3 seconds, leaving behind not even debris, just a slight gravitational anomaly that would fade within hours. In 6 minutes, half of the Krellian fleet had been erased from existence. The Allied forces broke formation immediately, some attempting to flee, others transmitting desperate surrender requests. The humans stopped firing and began transmitting coordinates for retreat vectors that would take the surviving ships out of the Arcturus sector by the safest possible routes. Fleet Admiral Werner's voice filled the silence. To all hostile forces, you have witnessed the minimum level of force required to defend human sovereignty. What you have not seen is the maximum level of force we are capable of deploying. Leave now, inform your governments that human space is not negotiable, and pray that we never have reason to demonstrate what our civilization can do when we stop holding back. The remaining Krellian and Allied ships fled. Of the 1,500 vessels that had entered the Arcturus sector, fewer than 700 escaped. The casualties numbered in the hundreds of thousands. And humanity had once again not lost a single ship. The council chamber descended into absolute chaos. Species that had been secretly planning to support the Krellian effort immediately began distancing themselves from the Empire. Several ambassadors demanded that humanity be declared a rogue state and subjected to complete quarantine. Others argued that the council should immediately negotiate a treaty recognizing all human territorial claims. Lord Skrull sat motionless, his skin pale, his political career clearly over along with the Krellian Empire's status as a major power. It was Ambassador Kelrix who finally requested permission to speak, his voice somehow cutting through the pandemonium. Chancellor Vornis, looking decades older than he had a month ago, recognized him with evident relief. Kelrix stepped forward, feeling the weight of hundreds of eyes upon him. Honored members of the council, we are having the wrong debate, he began. We are discussing how to contain humanity, how to limit them, how to protect ourselves from them. We are treating them as enemies because they have proven they can destroy us. But we are forgetting the most important fact about the humans. He paused, gathering his courage. They do not want to destroy us. They never did. Think about what we have witnessed. At HD 189733, they could have pursued the fleeing Krellian ships and eliminated them all, but they did not. In every border incursion, they disabled and escorted rather than destroyed. Even in the Arcturus sector, they stopped firing the moment the enemy began to retreat. Humanity has demonstrated overwhelming military superiority, but also perfect restraint. Thessa rose to support him. Ambassador Kelrix is correct. My intelligence network has confirmed that the weapons humanity used in Arcturus, these reality distortion devices, could theoretically be scaled up to planetary or even stellar targets. Humanity possesses the capability to destroy entire worlds, perhaps even to trigger stars to go supernova. They have likely had these capabilities for decades, possibly longer. And yet, they have never used them, never threatened to use them, never even hinted that they existed until we forced their hand. Kelrix continued, his voice gaining strength. We made the mistake of thinking that peace was weakness. We assumed that because humanity preferred negotiation, they were incapable of war. We were catastrophically wrong. But we are about to make an even worse mistake if we assume that because humanity is capable of terrible destruction, they are eager for it. They are not. Everything they have done, even in defending themselves, shows restraint. They gave Admiral Kress an hour to withdraw. They broadcast their defensive perimeter clearly so it could not be crossed accidentally. They have gone out of their way to minimize casualties while still defending their territory. He turned to address the entire council, his voice passionate now. Humanity is what they claim to be, a peaceful species. But they are peaceful by choice, not by limitation. They choose diplomacy because they understand the alternative better than any of us. They studied war so thoroughly that they learned to hate it. They prepared for conflict so comprehensively that they desperately wanted to avoid it. And now that we have forced them into a war, they are fighting it with both overwhelming force and deliberate mercy, trying to end it as quickly as possible with minimum loss of life. Chancellor Vornis's crystalline form had shifted to deep blue, a color that indicated thoughtful consideration in his species. What are you proposing, Ambassador Kelrix? Kelrix took a deep breath. I am proposing that we stop treating this as a military problem to be solved and recognize it as a diplomatic catastrophe that we created. I am proposing that the Council formally apologize to humanity for the injustice of the HD 189733 decision. I am proposing that we recognize all current human territorial claims and establish a new treaty that guarantees their sovereignty. And I am proposing that we invite humanity back to the Council, not as junior members to be patronized, but as equals to be respected. The chamber erupted again, but this time the tone was different. There was still fear, still uncertainty, but also something else, hope. The hope that perhaps this war could end before more lives were lost, before more fleets were destroyed, before humanity decided that the Council represented a threat that needed to be permanently eliminated. The debate continued for 16 hours, with representatives arguing every aspect of Kelrix's proposal. In the end, the vote was much closer than the one that had sparked the war, 243 in favor, 207 against, with 23 abstentions. The Krellian delegation, now led by a new ambassador after Lord Skrull's resignation, voted in favor, their empire too devastated to consider any other option. Kelrix was chosen to lead the diplomatic delegation to human space, along with Thessa and representatives from a dozen other species. They traveled to Earth itself, humanity's homeworld, a planet that none of them had ever visited despite 2 centuries of diplomatic relations. The humans had always come to the Council had never thought it important to go to them. The delegation was received in Geneva, in a building that humans explain had hosted their own international diplomatic efforts for over 4 centuries. Fleet Admiral Werner met them personally, along with representatives from Earth's unified government and the colonial administrations. To Kelrix's surprise, Admiral Chen was also present, though she stood quietly in the background. Werner listened to the Council's formal apology and proposal without interruption. When Kelrix finished presenting the terms, there was a long silence. Finally, the human admiral spoke. Ambassador Kelrix, the Council's apology is noted and appreciated. However, humanity requires more than words and territorial recognition. We require fundamental changes to how the Council operates. He gestured, and a holographic document appeared. These are humanity's terms for re-engagement with the galactic community. Kelrix reviewed the terms with growing surprise. He had expected demands for reparations, for Council military restrictions, for human supremacy. Instead, humanity's requirements focused on institutional reforms, mandatory arbitration processes for territorial disputes, Council intervention requirements before member species could use military force, representation proportional to population rather than seniority, and protection protocols for younger spacefaring civilizations. You are asking us to make the Council fairer, Kelrix said slowly, not to give humanity special privileges. Werner nodded. We went to the stars hoping to find a community of species that had evolved beyond the petty territorial conflicts that nearly destroyed our world. We found instead that the galaxy operates on the same principles of might makes right that we tried to leave behind. We can accept that, can operate within that reality. We have certainly proven we can. But we prefer not to. If the Council is willing to reform, to become what it claims to be, then humanity will gladly rejoin and contribute to building that better system. If not, then we will maintain our borders and our isolation and hope that in another few centuries, the galaxy might be ready for genuine cooperation. Thessa leaned forward, her expression curious. And if the Council refuses these terms? If we choose to maintain the old system and attempt to quarantine humanity? Admiral Chen spoke for the first time, her voice quiet but firm. Then you will fail. We will continue to defend our space. We will continue to expand into unclaimed systems. And eventually, enough species will recognize that the human model offers better stability and prosperity than the Council's hierarchical structure. You cannot defeat us militarily. You cannot contain us economically. You cannot isolate us diplomatically. Your only real option is to join us in building something better. Kelrix looked at the other Council delegates and saw his own realization reflected in their faces. Humanity had not just won a military conflict. They had created a situation where the entire galactic order would have to change or become irrelevant. And they had done it not through conquest or subjugation, but by being so overwhelmingly superior at violence that they could afford to be genuinely peaceful, so prepared for war that they could credibly demand a better way. "I will take these terms back to the Council," Kelrick said finally. "I cannot guarantee they will be accepted." Werner smiled, a very human expression that Kelrick had learned to interpret. "We know. But we are a patient species, Ambassador. We spent 200 years rebuilding our world. We can wait as long as necessary for the galaxy to rebuild its institutions. In the meantime, we have colony worlds to develop, scientific research to pursue, and arts and culture to create. We will be here, peaceful and prosperous, whenever the Council is ready to join us." 3 months later, the Galactic Council ratified humanity's proposed reforms by a vote of 312 to 161. The Krellian Empire, humbled and bankrupted by their military losses, voted in favor. So did 73 other species that had previously sided against humanity. The new Council Charter was signed on Earth, with Fleet Admiral Werner and Admiral Chen witnessing as humanity formally rejoined the galactic community. Kelrick attended the ceremony and found himself standing next to Admiral Chen during the reception that followed. He gathered his courage and asked the question that had haunted him since the war began. "Admiral, why did humanity really choose peace for so long? Was it truly philosophical conviction, or simply because you had not yet been pushed far enough?" Chen considered the question for a long moment, her aged eyes distant. "My great-grandmother fought in the Third World War, Ambassador. She survived the nuclear exchange that killed 4 billion humans in a single week. Before she died, she told me something I have never forgotten. She said that the tragedy of war is not that it brings out the worst in humanity, but that it brings out the best. The courage, the sacrifice, the determination, the innovation, all of humanity's greatest qualities emerge during our worst moments. We become extraordinary when we fight." She paused, and Kelrick saw deep sadness in her expression. But she also said that a species that can only be great during war is not truly great at all. Real greatness, she believed, was being capable of terrible things and choosing not to do them. Being prepared for the worst and working for the best. That is what humanity has tried to do for 2 centuries. We are not peaceful because we are weak. We are peaceful because we are strong enough to choose peace. She looked at him directly, and Kelrick saw in her eyes the same quality he had noticed in her first transmission, that cold determination that had terrified him. But now he understood it differently. It was not the determination to destroy, but the determination to protect, to build, to create something better than the cycle of conflict that had defined so much of galactic history. "We thought you were peaceful because you could not fight," Kelrick said quietly. "We were wrong." Chen smiled, a sad but genuine expression. "Yes, you were. And we thought the Council was enlightened because you had maintained peace for so long. We were wrong too. Sometimes it takes a war to reveal what everyone truly is. I just hope that now, knowing the truth about each other, we can all choose to be better." As Kelrick looked around the reception hall, seeing species that had been enemies weeks ago now cautiously engaging in diplomatic conversation, seeing humans moving among them with the same gentle courtesy they had always shown, he allowed himself to hope that Chen was right. Humanity had shown the galaxy its teeth, had proven beyond doubt that they were the apex predators they had always been. And having proven it, they were choosing once again to be the peaceful, cooperative species they wanted to be. The galaxy would never make the mistake of underestimating humanity again. But perhaps more importantly, humanity would never again have to wonder if their choice of peace was respected or merely tolerated. They had earned the right to be peaceful, and in doing so, had changed the galaxy forever.